Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to our third Distance Education Strategies and Solution, a collaboration between ProLiteracy and the EdTech Center at World Ed. My name is Jen Vanek, and I'm Director of Digital Learning and Research at the EdTech Center at World Ed. You just heard from Todd Evans, Director of Professional Development at ProLiteracy. And we're also joined today by my colleagues at World Ed, Victoria Neff and Ebony Vandros. And I'm going to turn it over to Ebony to give you the lowdown on how to participate in this webinar.
Thank you. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Zoom, you can find your control panel on the bottom of the Zoom screen. To access the chat feature, click on the chat icon in that control panel, and please select all panelists and attendees when you make comments or ask questions. That way all people can see your comments. To use the hand raise feature that is also in the control panel bottom of the screen, if you have a tech issue and we don't see your comment in the chat box, that will get our attention. If there are any other problems, please contact me at the email address below. Thank you.
Just a reminder, we are recording this webinar. You'll be provided with a list of all the websites, resources, and key points later. We'll also be able to send out the slides, a transcript, and a transcript of the chat and the Q&A, and then you will also get a certificate of participation for this webinar. Okay, so how are we doing on, should we get going, Todd?
Excuse me. Yes, we can go ahead and get going. I think the people coming in are slowing down. And just to remind everybody that if you have a question for the presenter, kind of a content question, to use the Q&A feature to ask that question. That helps us track and make sure that everyone's questions get answered during the webinar.
Great, thanks. So I'm super excited about today's presenter and today's topic. We're going to hear from Rachel Riggs, the family literacy instructor at Frederick Community College, who's going to be talking about digital literacy action plans. And then we will have the Q&A facilitated by Todd after that. One of the great things about these webinars is that Todd does not end them until every question has been answered. So this is truly a learning experience for you. And after Rachel's short presentation, you'll be able to further your own learning and personalize your own learning by posting this questions. So I hope you do. Just a reminder, this is a series. We are collaborating every fourth Friday in a webinar series to help the field build their expertise in using technology in support of adult learning. Next time we meet will be January 22nd, and we will be hearing about accessibility in online learning for adult students. So I hope that you will register and tune in for that webinar on January 22nd. So now let's turn our attention to Rachel. I first learned of Digital Literacy Action Plan when Rachel helped co-author an article that's going to be coming out in the COABE Journal sometime this winter. We wrote an article on how to work toward racial equity in digital literacy instruction and online learning. And Rachel offered this digital literacy action plan as one way to support learner agency and just really connect to learner needs and help learners feel visible and legitimate in their own learning. So I just thought it would be a perfect topic for this webinar series. And Rachel, I'm really glad to have you here. I know Todd is too. And at this point, we'll turn it over to you. So I will stop my share and you can pick it up.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all in the chat. We got people from all over. I'm so excited. I'm here in Maryland, so it's a rainy day, but talking about digital literacy is going to be my little ray of sunshine today. So today I'm presenting to you guys the digital literacy action plan that I created in response to some of the challenges that I faced when I ventured to integrate digital literacy into my ESL teaching. So today I just want to talk about, I want to open up the conversation a little bit about what are some of the challenges that we face when we are integrating digital literacy. And then I'll talk about using the digital literacy action plan, and I will share some resources with you guys. And then, as Jen said, we'll have a nice thorough Q&A at the end. A little bit about my journey. I did a lot of volunteer ESL teaching and some tutoring out of high school. And I have many years of just kind of freelancing and having fun being a volunteer ESL teacher. And then I decided to get my master's in TESOL. And right after finishing my master's, I got my first job at a community college here at Frederick Community College. And I started teaching in the adult ed program. Soon after I started teaching, I had, the instructional specialist came and observed me, and I had my first kind of opportunity for feedback. And I was asked, what will you be doing to implement digital literacy in your lessons? And me feeling quite confident after having just gotten my master's, I was like, what? What is digital literacy? I was clueless, really. I was clueless as to what digital literacy was. And all of the, and the importance of it, which is, really what has made me so passionate about it. So I began to look into it and start to try to implement it with my students. And the recommendation at that time was just to take them to a computer lab 5 times, like during a 10-week session. So I started taking my students to the computer lab, and then I started realizing, wow, this is a lot more challenging than I had imagined, because I had students who maybe were from backgrounds where they worked in IT in their home countries, and then a student who didn't even know how to navigate a mouse. So I had a huge range of skills and abilities. And then I also was struggling with my own knowledge about what is digital literacy, and going beyond just tools into what are digital literacy skills, and that journey of my own. So that is when I started, seeking solutions, and that is when the digital literacy action plan was born. So before I get into what it is, I really would love to hear from some of you guys about what challenges you're facing as you're trying to integrate digital literacy in your class. So if you look at the screen that I'm sharing, you should see the link at the top. If you go to that link, then you can just, it's just an open-ended response. So just let me know, what challenges are you facing? I would love to know. I think the more that we talk about the challenges, the more solutions we will find together. I'm just going to wait a moment. Okay, varying abilities. Yes. Yay! You have come to the right webinar. Young children needing their parents' attention. Yes. Okay. That has become a huge challenge recently. And when the pandemic hit, I was actually teaching family literacy. At this point, I've transitioned into the ESL Instructional Specialist, but I feel very, well acquainted with the issue of having children in the home. I have my own kindergartner here at home. Lack of community experience with experience, yes. Fear, yes. Everyone has a different device or different access. I hope we can address that today too. Access to internet, accessibility is a big issue right now in adult ed. Students not comfortable speaking on Zoom, no access to devices. I think of all the learners who are not serving, lack of technical abilities, yes. Suddenly have technical issues during class. Okay, unreliable internet. Students have different devices, yes. Unreliable internet, accessibility, yes. You guys have to read the COABE article that Jen said we co-authored. There's such great information about, the accessibility issues and what can we do about that. I learned a lot just by co-authoring that article for COABE, so please check that out. having to train on Zoom how to use Zoom. To make connections. Yes. Yes, I hope the digital literacy action plan will help you make connections and really be able to personalize your responses. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing. The poll is full, so I can't actually accept any more responses, but again, I just thank you guys for chiming in. Like I said, I think it's so important for us to feel comfortable talking about the challenges so that we can work together and find more solutions. And I think that the digital literacy action plan will address some of those issues. And then of course, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of digital equity and accessibility. So some of the challenges that I saw just on my own journey, teacher ed, like I said, I had just finished my master's and I felt like I was equipped for everything and I had no clue what digital literacy was. And I think that a lot of teachers feel inadequate when we talk about digital literacy because we ourselves are still developing in that area. So that can be a big challenge. Student access. As I mentioned, I was recommended to go to a computer lab. And I was actually told at one point that mobile phones were not part of digital literacy, which is not accurate. I'm not selling that. But you know, we have students who, okay, they're going to learn these skills on a desktop computer, and when they go home, they really have no way to practice those skills. And so we have to start including more devices into our digital literacy plans. Differentiation, that's a big one, and you guys talked about that a lot. Just different abilities. Different backgrounds, different levels of knowledge of technology. And then learner agency, I think, is another big issue when we're talking about digital literacy. Are we giving students choice in what they're learning? And I think that connects a lot with teacher education. Do we feel comfortable enough giving students choice? What if they want to learn something that we don't yet know how to do? And I hope the digital literacy action plan will make you feel empowered to come alongside students and facilitate them when they have goals that maybe you don't feel proficient enough in those areas. So what is the digital literacy action plan? In short, it is a step-by-step learning plan created by students to learn new digital skills that align with their personal goals. Key there being personal goals. What do they need to know? How do we differentiate for their different goals? So how does the digital literacy plan address some of the challenges I mentioned? The digital literacy action plan will take the focus away from the teacher and it will put it more on the learner and them taking the lead in their learning. And so the teacher education part diminishes a little bit as we give more agency to our students. Student access, again, the digital literacy action plan puts more of the control into the students' hands. And so whatever devices that they have available to them, those are the devices that they will use to learn those new digital skills. And we don't have to impose on them whatever prescriptive technology we think they should be using. Differentiation, for the digital literacy action plan, they will each be creating their own plan. And so we can address the different needs in the classroom. And then finally, learner agency, which I hope I've covered in these other areas, but the goal here really is to give them the choice, give them the responsibility, put it into their hands and facilitate that process. So the steps of the digital literacy action plan, just 4 basic steps. The first step is goal setting. If you are in an adult ed environment, I feel pretty confident that almost everyone starts out a class session with goal setting. So I hope that the digital literacy action plan will fit neatly into what you already do to kick off your classes. The next step would be creating the action plan, and then searching and learning and reflection. And so the idea is for all of this to take place over an entire class session. For me, that means 10 weeks, but I know that that's going to be different from program to program. So for my first lesson, I would include the goal setting. For maybe the next lesson or the next week or something, they'll create their action plan. And then over a course of weeks, they'll be searching and learning. And then at the end of the session would be the reflection piece. So for goal setting, this is just the first step. And the idea here is to take that normal goal setting routine that you have and just connect it to digital literacy. So what goals do students have in their life? What goals do they have for their careers? And how can we show them that, okay, you know, if you're going into this career, what kind of computerized tools will you be using? What kind of technology will you be using? And what digital literacy or what digital skills do you need to acquire in order to be able to do that? So just making that connection and helping them make that connection. I have two resources here that I want to share that are designed to be used during this first stage of the goal setting. These were designed using the Maryland Digital Literacy Framework, which I want to show you guys quickly. Someone just tell me in the chat if you're seeing the framework. You guys seeing the framework? Yes. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. I've been using Zoom for a while, but you just never know when it's going to come out the way you want it to. So the Maryland Digital Literacy Framework has laid out these areas of skills. And so we have productive, technical, civic, communicative, collaborative, computational thinking, and investigative. And it's been very helpful for me to be familiar with a framework. There are many out there, but it's helped me to plan and to really get to know, okay, what is digital literacy and what are the skills that my students might need and what is the full breadth and depth of digital literacy. So I just want to show this to you. I'm not going to go into it, but there are lots of presentations about it. If you Google it, you will find lots of materials to explain it to you. But I wanted to just say that these two tools that I've made, these are just Google Forms, they were designed with this framework in mind. So the first one is the Digital Literacy Survey. And this survey, I'm actually going to go to the edit view just so I can show you all of the questions in one fell swoop. The idea behind this survey is to get information from students at the start of your class on what devices they're using, what kind of operating systems that they're working with, because that can affect, how they're going to learn different tools and different skills. What kind of computer do you have? And then it goes into what can you do with technology, a little bit of a self-assessment, and then what goals do you have? And then also some career, connection to whether they're using technology at work and what technology they might be using at work. So the survey, the idea behind the survey, like I said, is to use it maybe at the startup of a class for any level. And then also if you feel, and this will make more sense in a minute, but if you feel that your students are not proficient enough in the English language to complete their own action plans, then I would recommend having them fill out the survey, which in Google Chrome, you can easily translate into any language. Having them fill out the survey, and then you as the teacher creating an action plan for your class using that information from the survey. The second tool I have here is another Google form. Yay, Google Forms. And it is for the digital literacy action plan, and it's actually going to connect students to skills and have them think about what digital literacy skills do they want or need to acquire in order to reach their goals. And so if you're having students create individual action plans, this Google form is very helpful in getting them to think about what they want to do. And it will also help you as a teacher if you're able to then maybe group them based on what skills they've chosen to focus on. So those are the two tools. And yes, we will be sharing these at the end of the presentation. I'll have a whole set of resources, everything that I'm presenting today. So they will be shared. Okay, so after we have helped students set goals and gotten some information about what students are able to do, the next step is for them to create their action plans. So this is a Google Doc, this image that you're seeing here with their goal, the materials and resources they would use, having them put together some steps and a timeline for how they're going to acquire their goal, and then just having them take notes throughout the process, and based off of what they're learning, creating next steps if that alters anything in their original plan. So during this step, we just want them to gather any resources, right? They've set their goal. We want them to gather the resources, which you as a teacher will hopefully have a good arsenal after this presentation of resources to share with them and suggest to them, and then create a step-by-step plan with a timeline. I wanted to show you guys a couple of resources. Again, we'll be sharing all of this at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to show you some examples of what you might use. So in the technical, again, these are all skills taken from the Maryland Digital Literacy Framework. In the technical skill area, just an example of something that you could suggest to a student is this page on Crowded Learning with different resources for mousing practice, and have them kind of look at those and then make a plan. Okay, I'm going to watch the GCF mouse tutorial, and then I'm going to practice, and have them including these things in their plan. So if they were focusing on a technical skill, maybe they would include a website for mousing practice, a website for typing practice, and a website that maybe a Quizlet set that shows them the different buttons on a computer, just as an example. In the civic, maybe you would lead them to the GCF Global site, which has tons of resources put into different modules. So it's easy for them to kind of plan out, okay, I'm going to go through module 1, module 2, module 3, and then set a timeline for those. So this one would go under the civic skills, how to be a good digital citizen. And this is about using information correctly. So they could easily plan out a timeline and even use a quiz to check their understanding. And then I also wanted to show you, like I said, if you have, I've worked a lot with beginners, so I realize that some of this is a little lofty if you're working with a low beginning, English speaking class. So I wanted to show you guys as well, you could use the survey and gather information about what your students are able to do, what devices they're using, and then you can set out a plan for your class as a whole. And this is an accompaniment to the digital literacy framework from Maryland Department of Labor. This is the instructor implementation guide, and it gives tons of great ideas for lesson activities that fall into those different skill areas. So if you've determined with your class that you want to really focus on helping them improve their collaborative digital skills, then you might take a look at the instructor implementation guide to get some ideas for activities and create your action plan for your class. Okay, so then after we have set goals, we've created action plans, the next step would be the searching and learning. This would, oh, thank you, Todd. I'm seeing now that you're sharing all the links. I appreciate that. This would be, over probably some weeks, having them work through that timeline that they created. So you would maybe want to build this into classwork or into homework plans, give them some time to do the actual, investigating that they have laid out in their action plan. So give them some time to work through the steps of the action plan and provide them support, track their progress. And, you as the teacher here are just there to facilitate their learning and help them move along as they acquire those new skills. The last step at the end of your session would be just the reflection piece, talking with students. And I think this is really important. I think it would be easy to not include this, but I think it's truly, truly very important that we give them some time to analyze the tools and the resources that they used and think about the process and what they just did. So why is that so important? I think it's important because we all are, beginning to get, not beginning to, we always have been, but we're thrown into this technology thing right now more than ever. And it's really important that we feel empowered to analyze technology and take a really critical approach to it and think about, wow, like these tools actually did not help me at all. Or wow, these tools are great and I want to bookmark them and keep them around. So really just giving them time to think about the technology they used or the tools that they used and analyze how useful they were. Sorry guys, let me get, my notes are way back at the beginning of the presentation. Okay, so just a little review of the different steps. So the goal setting step, oh my goodness, wow. Okay, that didn't work how I planned it to, obviously, but that's okay. We've all had those moments, right? The goal setting step is, we're going to have students set their goals. We're going to open up the conversation. We'll connect their life and career goals with digital goals, and gather information on what their goals are so that we can help them along or create a plan if it's going to be the teacher's plan. And then the action plan, is when the students really map out the process for themselves, talk about what resources they're going to use, and create their timeline. Searching and learning is just the process of acquiring the skills and going through the modules and learning the new tools and technology that they've determined are important to them. And then the reflection piece could be done, as a whole class. It could be done on more of an individual basis. But at the end, just making sure that we include some time for them to think analytically about what they just experienced with the digital literacy action plan. And then this is my favorite part, because I really, what the big goal here is not for all of our students to have Gmail accounts. It's not for all of our students to be able to type 80 words per minute. The real goal behind this whole digital literacy action plan is to empower our students to then move into the rest of their lives and their futures feeling like they can acquire digital skills relatively on their own, right? So making them feel like they can gather resources, they can analyze resources, they can use these different websites and learn new digital skills as they come along to new and different goals throughout the rest of their lives. So this part to me is the real woohoo of the digital literacy action plan, them moving into a brighter and more productive future for themselves. So if you want to access the resources that I showed today, I think someone is going to put a link to them in the chat box for sure. So keep an eye on the chat box. I think Victoria is going to put a link to all of the resources, or you can scan this QR code to access the resources. They're on a Wakelet. At the bottom, there is a link to the Crowd-Ed Learning digital skills. It's a big, long list of digital literacy resources. So please check that out too. I know I just kind of threw some in here, but if you're really looking for more, on that list, you'll find a lot of different links and supplemental stuff. So check out the Wakelet. And I'm gonna go ahead and move to my last slide here. I thank you all so much for coming in and listening. I really hope that this is useful to you, and I hope that you'll implement it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and talking more about it. So please, if you want to contact me, feel free to contact me. But please stick around for the Q&A so we can talk this out and see how it will work for you.
Thank you, Rachel. And we do have some great questions in the Q&A, which we'll get to in just a second. I just want to remind folks that we will be sending out a follow-up email on Monday. It will have the slides from this session, and we'll also put together a summary sheet that will have the key points that Rachel has talked about, plus links to all of the resources that she's identified. And that's a nice summary sheet that you can share with your colleagues at work. So let's go ahead and get to the questions. Our first one, I think, is a good introductory question. Just what kind of classes do you embed this digital learning action plan in? Are there certain classes that work better than others? Do you kind of embed it into everything that you do?
Yeah, so I have embedded this into our grant funded adult ed basic ESL classes at all levels. So from beginner and on, like I said, with beginners, I'm usually, creating the action plan, but I do always make sure to connect their goals with some digital literacy goals and to talk to them about digital literacy and see what they can do and what they want to do. So with beginners, that's what I would do. I have not yet. I teach some bridge to careers classes, some IELCE, IET classes, and I have not yet used this in those classes, although I think it would be very useful. And then I also did use this in my family literacy classes. So yes, basic ESL, family literacy. I think it would work with almost any context in adult ed, really.
Okay, great. And I think this is another kind of question, uh, question slash comment of maybe a digital learning action plan for instructors. Um, he says many of us are still trying to figure out how to really leverage the various technologies. So thoughts about this process for instructors as well, or for instructors and students kind of collectively, going through this process together, and teachers modeling the creation of a digital literacy action plan with the students.
Yes, I love the idea of an instructor, especially going through this process with their students. I think we need to start taking more of a stance when it comes to technology and digital literacy, of instructors and students being very much on an equal footing and learning together. I think that this year has shown me that. But I love the idea of instructors going through this with their students and modeling something that they want to learn, and how they're going to create their timeline, and which steps they're going to go through, and what resources they're going to use. I see that as being extremely beneficial on both sides. If an instructor would model the action plan and then have students complete it and complete it with the students, I think that that is a great idea.
Great. And we had kind of a comment in the chat about that reflection stage of the action plan from Amy, who said, one, loves seeing the reflection piece in there. And she says that she likes to ask one question about the process of what we did, and one question about the content, and kind of uses that as a structure. Are there ways, like in that reflection piece, are there certain things that you try to um, emphasize for students to reflect on, or do you focus both on the content and the process aspects?
Yeah, that's a great point, Amy. I do. I talk about, like I said, what tools and resources were useful to you. So, sometimes people will say, "Oh my gosh, I spent way too long on YouTube trying to learn this, and I shouldn't have done that. I should have used," so there's a lot of that, analyzing those tools and resources. But then I also will talk about the process. What do you think about the digital literacy action plan? How will you use it in the future? Will you use it in the future? What could have made it better? So we talk about all of those things, and I really like to do that, like I said, in a group setting, so that they can all affirm one another, or support one another. So yes, process and content. That's a great way to put it.
Excellent, excellent. We have another question. Do you have any recommendations for differentiation in class, since students' abilities can vary a lot? And you talked a little bit about that, and kind of the individuality of the plan is one way to differentiate, but assuming you're still going to be working with students on how to create those plans, like how do you approach that, students' different needs?
Okay. I don't know, Todd, are we talking about differentiating, in other words, having them do different things with the plan, or are we talking about just differentiating in terms of their digital skills varying?
I'm gonna say, I'm gonna interpret for this questionnaire and say both. So one would be kind of, how do you differentiate between the different digital learning needs? And you talked about some people may not know how to work a mouse, and others may, do social media posting in their, in their own language. But also just kind of within the context of creating the plan themselves, and their abilities to type, to research, to kind of identify those things that need to go into the plan. How do you kind of support those aspects as well?
Yeah, okay. So, the first thing I would recommend is for for you to be working with a framework, like I mentioned, that really helps me understand the different levels, even within a skill set, like within the technical skills. And then also, there have been times where I have given, okay, so let's say, I've had a student before who he was doing like graphic design or something in his country. And so in his case, even the things that he wanted to learn in terms of digital tools were beyond my knowledge. So what I did with him was, I really didn't even provide him with resources. I just said, okay, why don't you think about some kind of technology, some kind of tool that you want to learn that's going to help you move into your next step, and you create your action plan. Whereas with someone who doesn't know yet how to navigate a mouse or those really basic skills, I am more working one-on-one with them to create the action plan with them, and to, it's more of that teacher centered. I know, don't yell at me for saying that, but it is more teacher centered in terms of I will probably be assigning things to them, and being more of a leader in the process, and less giving it to them to do independently. A resource that I really love for differentiating in that area is the Google Applied Digital Skills website. It gives a lot of, obviously digital skills, but then, you can assign those, and I use Google Classroom. So it's really easy for me to assign those to different students. If I have students who are maybe not as able to go and explore on their own, then I might just do more of that assigning. But I still think going through this process and gathering that information from them and making sure that you're focusing it on their goals is still super important. Make sure that you're giving them a voice. And in terms of providing the resources, maybe that's more something you're doing than the students exploring on their own. But just make sure that they have the choice, they have the voice in the whole process. Did that help? Was that clear?
I think so. And they'll ask a follow-up question if it wasn't. Um, we have another question. So how would you apply this to ESL students who are very low beginners who really have difficulty communicating in English?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I have worked with low beginner literacy ESL students, and it's challenging. I would say, first of all, in this area of digital literacy, don't be shy about translating and using translation devices, and allowing them to do this in their first language, because it's so important. And I don't know, to me, even though I am an ESL teacher, the digital literacy skills and the digital equity issues are more important to me than sticking to some prescribed notion of them only using English in my class. So I think when it comes to the digital literacy stuff, maybe allow them to use different translation tools and go through this process in their language, as much as you can assist with that. So those Google Forms that I shared, those can be, those can be easily translated on a cell phone or in a web browser. It's pretty easy to see those in different languages. So I would say, if you have those low beginners, allow them to do it in their own language. Be prepared to provide more scaffolding and support to them. And but yeah, that would be my number one thing, is just let them do it in their home language, and make sure that they are given the time and space to set those goals and to see the importance of digital literacy in their future here in the States or wherever they end up.
So the idea is really to focus on them developing those digital skills and digital knowledge, with the idea that eventually their English improves enough that you can start to work on those skills with English oriented materials. But until that happens, really kind of separating those out, even though they're both being done in the same class.
Yeah, and I'll mention too that the Maryland Digital Literacy Framework Instructor Implementation Guide, that is super useful because all of those activities are integrated into ESL classrooms. So take a look at that. It will give you some ideas for how to integrate technology, digital skills, language into ESL classes. And then I'll also add that teaching, incorporating into vocabulary teaching icons, right? That's a new language that we're all speaking, and different technology verbiage, incorporate that into their vocabulary learning. So with those low beginners, it's not, I don't want to totally segregate the two. You can integrate it into your lesson, but when it comes to the digital literacy action plan, maybe give them a little more freedom to do that in their first language.
Great. And here's, I think, an interesting question. So students are creating this digital learning action plan. What do you do with students who um, maybe don't know enough about the digital world to know what they don't know and may need? So your
Yep.
action plan is really focused on identifying what I need to do to be able to accomplish things. But if you're not aware of what that digital world looks like, you may not even be aware of what the tools are that are out there that can help you do things. So it might be hard to kind of get started.
Yes, I totally agree. And even just looking at the form, the digital literacy action plan form, I've kind of had plans to incorporate more imagery and things into that, because I think you're totally right. It's kind of like, digital literacy is hard for us as teachers to understand. So our students going to understand it. But I want to add to that there's a big language opportunity here, in terms of having students read part of a digital literacy framework, or having students debate which digital skills are most important, and incorporating that language into an ESL classroom, to the point where they're actually learning more about the topic of digital literacy, and what skills are included in that, taking advantage of that opportunity. So, it can be difficult. It can be difficult to help students know what they need. And that's why the goal setting piece is also very important, because once students know what their goals are in life, it's a lot easier for you as a teacher to say, okay, well, if you're looking to do this, or if you want to help your kids with their homework, well, what does the local public school system, what LMS do they use? And can we teach you how to navigate that LMS, or how to turn in an assignment on Google Classroom, for example? So, that goal setting part will be helpful to an instructor who's trying to help their students see what digital skills they need. But it'll be a challenge.
Actually, and I'm going to claim moderator privilege here. When I was looking at your digital learning action plan, that chart or table, it reminded me almost of a KWL chart, or a variation of a KWL chart, where you're identifying kind of what you already know, what you want to know, what you want to learn, and kind of where and how you're going to do that. And I wonder if you think that there would be opportunity to kind of blend those two things together, especially in like a reading class, or something like that. And that might make it easier to integrate the learning of the digital skills uh, with the other language work.
Yes, Todd, I love that idea. I love the idea of putting the digital literacy action plan into other materials for a class. I think it's harder for me to do that, I guess, because every class is different. But this is why I love these conversations, because that's a great idea. And I hope that somebody will go and do that and then email me with the results, and we can share those out. Yes, I love it.
Great. So we have another question, and this one is about improving technology access. So As students are kind of identifying their digital learning action plan, how do you address those issues that relate to technology access? Do you have any resources that you kind of tie students in? Do you have any ways to um, uh, help them get access to laptops or smartphones or things like that?
Yeah, this one's kind of hard to answer because it's so regional, and I'll just, in our at our college, our computers are only available for emergency use right now. So I've been relying on kind of tapping into what the public schools are providing. I've talked to libraries about what they're providing. I think it's really important just for you to know locally what are the resources and how you can connect students with those. But please, I beg of you, don't ignore their smartphones. I know it's difficult, right? We're going to be using their data. And sometimes it's hard to get them to know how to, download an app or whatever. But just remember that most of them are using smartphones, using their mobile phones for learning. And don't hesitate to have them focus mostly on those, especially in the time that we're in where their other devices might be tied up by their children who are at home. But yeah, I'd say tap into the local resources, see what's available in your area. And the beauty of the action plan as well is that students will know what is within their grasp, I guess.
Mhm.
So they'll be able to plan on using those tools.
Great. Here's I think a great question from Megan, who says, if we have a multi-level ESOL class, is it better to work with students one-on-one in developing their action plans, or can you work with students in small groups, maybe grouping students with similar goals or similar language levels?
Yeah, for sure. You can group them. I would group them. It's going to make it more manageable for you. Consider grouping them based off of their digital literacy abilities, because then you can just change the scaffolding. So like, for example, if I have a student who is advanced English proficiency, but low digital literacy with a student who is low English proficiency and low digital literacy, I can put them together and I can have that stronger English student helping me to give the instructions and facilitate the activities that both of them are going to do because they're on the same digital literacy level, if that makes sense. So maybe think about grouping them according to digital literacy, but you know your students the best. And I would say, yeah, sticking them into the groups is going to benefit you in terms of managing your class. And then, you can work from them and with them individually as you kind of get started and see where they need you.
Great. Here's another one. What topics or interests have your students launched in their digital literacy action plans? And do you discuss other action plans and show examples so that, when you're working with a new group of students to kind of give them ideas or give them kind of a starting point of ways to think about their own action plan? Or do you just start from scratch each time?
The pandemic changed that a lot for me because I had previously, a lot of this was on paper. I miss paper. A lot of this was on paper. So, I didn't have as much to share with the next class. It's actually enabled me to share more between classes. I've had some students create videos and stuff. To give you some examples of what students have accomplished, I had a student who was a business owner and she wanted to learn how to use Excel. And so she was figuring out how to do graphs in Excel. So she used GCF Global for that. I had another student who was a construction worker and he wanted to learn, I think it was Microsoft Access. Was that it? I get them all mixed up. But anyway, and he was able to kind of work on that. Another thing I want to add about that is that sometimes you don't have the tools that they want to learn, and so you have to really rely on these different websites and stuff, you know, if they can't actually get into Microsoft Access or something. Anyway, yeah, so I do. Of course, I try to show the next group of students what has happened in the previous one, but this has been changing so much as I've gone through and done it with each class that, you know, what one class did might be totally different from the next. So, you know, I'm just kind of trying to stay flexible and all
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So you just kind of brought up how things have changed when you were doing this in class and it was kind of paper oriented, and now you're doing it in the time of COVID. So we have a couple of questions that are connected to that. Like, what do you do when people need to do when you have to do some troubleshooting around a technical problem with a student? Do you take time in class to do that, like during a Zoom session to do that troubleshooting? Do you pull them um, out of class? And just your general approach to supporting folks when they're, you know, with those technical issues when you're not there face to face in a classroom.
Yeah, it was definitely easier in a computer lab or a classroom. So now, you know, I try to use you know, breakout rooms. I use Zoom, so I am able to do breakout rooms. So for students who are doing all right, you know, I throw them in a breakout room and I kind of try to work through other things with the other students. I do find it very helpful if you're having them complete the steps outside of class, you know, like as a homework type thing. Then when we all come back to class, maybe we have some questions or we can reflect. But I don't know, for some reason, I find it easier for students to be working on these digital skills, not on Zoom.
Yeah.
So I think it's helpful, you know, just have them maybe work through step one on your digital literacy action plan this week. And the other added benefit to that is that you can just kind of say, reach out to me if you run into something, and then, you know, it's your free time. So there's that, but, you know, then you can take calls from students or something if they've gotten started and are running into something and you don't have a whole class waiting on you. So I think it is helpful in this environment to make it part of what they're doing outside of class. And then just maybe use your class time as kind of a time for them to talk about it, or, you know, ask questions during that time. So, yeah.
Excellent. And I tell you what, I think this is a good place to take a quick break and just remind folks that the webinar is supposed to end at the top of the hour. And I'll say the top of the hour because we have a lot of time zones represented here. But Rachel has been gracious enough to agree to stick around after the end of the webinar to make sure that everybody's questions get answered. We will cut off asking questions at the top of the hour. So if you have a question, I'm going to encourage you to type those into the Q&A now. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Rachel to stop sharing her screen and Jen to pull up the slides so we can talk to you about some upcoming webinars, and then we'll get back to Rachel.
There you go, Todd.
All right. So our next webinar in this series is going to be in the new year, Friday, January 22nd. Again, same time. And we're going to have Melissa Hellquist, who's the Director of Community Writing at Salt Lake Community College. And she's going to talk about accessibility issues in digital literacy programs. And I know that is something that as a course designer for pro literacy, that we are concerned about working towards improving our accessibility for folks who need that. So I think that's going to be a very, very valuable webinar, and we'll be sending out e-blast about that, inviting you to register for it at the start of the new year. So the fact that you're attending this one or you signed up for this one means you're on our mailing list, and you'll get a notification about that webinar. And then Here are some upcoming webinars from Pro Literacy. We've just recently released an advocacy toolkit. So we have a webinar on the 9th and the 16th connected to that toolkit and using PAC data to do advocacy and advocacy campaigns and marketing and things like that. So encourage you to see those. And then on December 10th, we have a webinar on bringing conversation clubs to Zoom. And you can find a list of our upcoming webinars and recordings of previous webinars at proliteracy.org/webinars. And I think Jen has some webinars to tell you about, or PD opportunities to tell you about from EdTech.
Yeah, so the EdTech Center is running the second Friday series, our distance education strategy sessions. And the next session, next Friday, you're going to learn about collaborative processes for building open, centralized learning resource repositories. That's like, imagine, this is presented by and Masters from South Carolina and some teachers that she's worked with to collaborate in developing repositories of open ed resources in a nicely organized way so that teachers know what they're working with has been vetted and is aligned with standards. So I hope that you will, I'm sure Ebony or Victoria is chatting the link. So if you're not already registered for those second Friday webinars, I hope that you will register and see us there. And then also we have our self-paced free microlearning course that we published this summer called Transforming Distance Education. The participation in these online microlearning modules has been wonderful. I think that we've had about 600 or 700 teachers who have gotten badges from Credly that are synced to this. And so every single badge is an opportunity for a teacher to be able to share, digitally represent the skills that they've learned in LinkedIn or on a digital web resume. Could send as like a little logo in the bottom of your email. Just great opportunity for you to learn at your own pace in bite-sized chunks and then easily prove that learning through badging. All righty. So I think at this point, if there are any lingering questions, I guess this is where we have a couple of minutes for Rachel to respond to them. And I will just flip back. Again, thank you so much, Rachel. This was a great session. And thanks to Todd and everyone else for continuing and deepening the conversation with your really thoughtful questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me, I know some of you have to go, so let me again thank you all for coming. And those of you who want to stick around and listen to Rachel's responses to the remaining questions, you're welcome to do so. But we are going to cut off the questioning at this point. So Rachel, we do have a few more questions about, and they kind of center around this idea that you talked about letting people learn digital skills in their native language or using kind of translation dictionaries, and that issue around balancing people using those kind of native language support pieces versus the efforts to try to wean people off of, let's say, a Polish dictionary or something like that, so that they can learn and practice more in English. And just I guess what we're looking for is kind of what's your philosophy on those things? You already talked about that some, but a little bit more, and kind of how do you approach that process of making that switch between doing things in people's native language and migrating them over to English-based resources?
Sure. So it's, part of the issue right now is that there's not tons of teaching material with really good quality digital literacy stuff built in. And so I'll say that, if we're teaching students the language that they need in these areas to be able to function and to learn, then that's how we wean them off of looking in a dictionary or something. So if we are including in our vocabulary lessons words like chat box and share screen and things like that, then that's how we get them away from dictionaries and stuff. We get them away from those things by building it into our lessons and helping them learn and grow. But you know, it's difficult because I feel within me kind of a divide, because I am passionate about ESL and the ways that helps people. And I'm also passionate about digital literacy and the ways that helps people. And so as much as possible, I want to integrate the two. But at times I feel that there's a very basic need for digital skills that sometimes supersedes my desire to teach them English. So I don't know. I mean, I feel you're asking for a philosophy and I feel conflicted within myself. So it's hard to provide one, but I do believe that I'll say this. I want ESL teachers around the world to be banding together to inject more digital literacy into ESL learning, ESL lessons, ESL curriculum, ESL open educational resources, so that we can be integrating the two more seamlessly and supporting one another in that. So yeah, I think it's still a big work in progress, but it's definitely possible. And I really appreciate all of the work that the Maryland Department of Labor did in creating that instructor implementation guide to help us imagine how we can integrate English language teaching and digital skills and put them together instead of having them so segregated.
Yeah, and I think your own struggle kind of reflects the idea that it really might just be a case by case thing of what feels comfortable and right for that instructor and that class or that particular student at that time.
Absolutely. And I think also I'll add that, if we have a student with their Polish dictionary in front of them, glancing up and down from Zoom, I think that was what someone mentioned, just have them teach them how to do that on their computers. Then you've incorporated a digital literacy skill, but they can still have their beloved dictionary. So, show them an online dictionary.
That's a great solution. Making lemonade out of lemons, you might say.
Yeah, there you go.
We have another question about the digital learning websites. Do those, you mentioned like the CrowdEd and the GCF and the Maryland digital literacy framework. Do you know that do those websites have translations available? Can students get those in, especially the tutorials in like Spanish or their native languages?
Yes, I know that GCF Global offers all of that, definitely in Spanish and possibly in other languages. And if anyone else, if you know about this, please just chime in. I'm not I don't know all of it. The Maryland Digital Literacy Framework, that is a PDF in English. So, there would be ways to translate that, but it wouldn't be as easy as some other websites. But, another thing to consider is just showing students how to translate things within their web browser, and that will sometimes produce good results as well. I'm trying to think, what were the other ones mentioned? There's North Star. Does anyone know if North Star offers other languages? I don't believe so, but I could be wrong.
No, they don't.
Okay. So GCF Global, I would say is the most progressive in that way. Jen, you probably know more than I do in that area.
It's really hard to sustain multilingual tracks of parallel content, because every time you have to make one, you have to make those changes in others. So it's really rare that happens. I think your cue about using the affordances of Google in order to translate content is probably the way to go. And I just want to, since you invited me in, I just want to make one observation. If learners feel like they're not legitimate participants in any learning environment, they're not going to persist and they're not going to engage. So I really am so happy to hear that home language, you think that there is some room for home language use. Especially if you have learners who are speaking a shared language in a classroom, it doesn't need to be their own, like everybody's first language. But if they have a shared language that they could use to support each other in their digital literacy development incrementally, and as Todd said, in specific cases, then I think, why not? It's one of their the assets that they come to their learning with. So why not like use the whole person's, and not just make them deny part of themselves.
Yes, thank you.
I think that's a great point, Jen.
Mhm.
Here's a great question, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit. Maria asked, is there a simple step-by-step how to use Zoom that she can give to students? And it makes me think, do you wind up creating, as part of the support for the digital literacy action plan, some of those kind of simple guides or how-tos about how to use certain types of technology, or do students wind up creating those themselves as part of their action plan?
Oh gosh, if only you knew the number of screenshots and screen grabs I take. I do, and I end up creating a lot of those kind of tutorial things myself, but I also really try to build in the skills part of that. In other words, don't teach them how to use a tool by showing them step by step where to click, but have them think critically about, okay, well, I'm here, right? This is what my screen looks like. And you can use a screenshot, right? We'll take a screenshot of Zoom right now. And I'll say, okay, I'm here. So where do I need to go to send a message to my teacher, a private message? Okay. And so they'll hopefully say chat box. But, I try to include the critical thinking and not just give them a set of slides that says, click here, click here, click here, click here. Because that computational, that critical thinking is another really important thing when we talk about digital literacy. And so including even just the vocabulary. So like at the start of a session, I'll talk about different Zoom vocabulary, including mute yourself, unmute yourself, and those things. But yes, I do end up offering a lot of, support in that sense. And then another piece, another way, right, to inject the digital literacy while we're teaching the digital literacy is to have them go and look for those tutorials. So go to zoom.us. Okay. On the Zoom webpage, the Help Center webpage, they give the different devices and operating systems so that you can adjust to whatever screen you may be looking at. So even just that in itself, having them go to that webpage and choose a device, that is as a lesson to them. Some of them don't even know, what devices they might be using. So that's a way to empower them. And so then in the future, when there's something else they want to know how to do on Zoom, they can go there and they know what to do. They know what device they're on and how to get the best instructions. So always try to put that digital literacy into the digital literacy as much as you can, and not, spoon feed and step-by-step them with, your screenshots and all of that, because, it's going to make them stronger the more that they can do that independently.
Great. I think that's great advice. And it really reflects what we know about adult learning in general. We have a question. You mentioned kind of a 10 session class and then integrating the development of the action plan into that 10 sessions. But can you talk a little bit about like how often that meets, how long the class is? Are you having that same kind of intensity for virtual classes on Zoom that you were having in face-to-face? So people can kind of get a better perspective of kind of how that's spread out, the level of intensity, the level of hours that kind of go along with integrating this digital literacy action plan into your regular curriculum.
Yeah, sure. So it's actually a 10-week session. We do 10-week sessions. So it's 20 classes because it's twice a week. So we meet twice a week for 3 hours. That's the typical basic ESL schedule at Frederick Community College. So the original suggestion made to me was to take 5 of those class periods and take students to the computer lab. And so when I first started doing the digital literacy action plan, I actually used those 5 computer lab visits as their time to work on the action plan. So, on the first one, we talked about digital literacy, then maybe 2 through 4, they were actually, working through things. And then on the last, during the last class would be the reflection. And then as I continued to use it, I started, spreading it out a little bit more. So rather than just choosing to do that for 5 class periods, I, would integrate it more, but in shorter chunks throughout the whole 20 sessions. So I can't tell you really an exact schedule of what that looks like, but it looks like, during our first class, maybe dedicating 30 minutes to connecting our goals with digital literacy and defining digital literacy. Then during our next class meeting, maybe we're taking the survey or doing the action plan Google form. And then maybe the next week, right? So those are our first 2 classes. So maybe in our third class, I'm showing them the action plan and they're filling in just the goals section. So I prefer to do it in shorter chunks throughout the whole time if possible.
Okay, great. And you talked about sharing kind of examples of action plans from previous students. Do students send you like a completed digital literacy action plan at any time? Or really, since this is kind of a process, is there even such a thing as a completed action plan?
So students share with me up to the timeline part because I feel like that's really, I want to see that they have a plan. And then as they're going through, I know they never at the end have to turn in, the notes and what adjustments they made and how they pivoted or anything like that. So I will see it really up until that point, and then from there, it's just them taking the time, and I'll kind of say, okay, let's complete this step on your action plan for homework, and I'm checking in with them a lot, but it's usually not that same Google Doc that they're resharing with me, if that makes sense.
That does. And then our last question, and this is more of I think a comment or a piece of information from Anita. Just says, can you mention Adobe Liquid for smartphone use? And then she explains Adobe Liquid helps students adjust font spacing size to make academic or denser documents more readable. And I'm not familiar with Adobe Liquid, but I think maybe Jen or somebody posted in the chat about Adobe Liquid. So if you could kind of talk, anybody that's familiar with that, if you can kind of talk about that, I think that would be great.
I'm happy to weigh in, but if anybody is still on the call, I think it was Anita Lamonis. Do chime in the chat. We actually ran a webinar on liquid mode about a month ago. Essentially, it's this great new tool that is actually already available on Adobe. So if you have your students put Adobe Reader on their phone, there is an icon at the top that represents liquid mode. And when they push that, they have some options about how to change the text on the page. So we're actually developing a partnership with Adobe that's going to lead to some field testing between January and March. So earlier in the chat, I actually posted a link to a feedback form. If you and Anita had posted a help video that shows you how to get into liquid mode. So if you all would actually hear, it's a little bit up. So if you, thank you, Ebony has chatted the webinar and the video of our webinar, but we would love more feedback. So those of you who have used liquid mode, do fill out the form And then within that, you'll be able to let us know if you're interested in field testing.
Fantastic. And just to remind everybody, in the follow-up email that you receive on Monday, we'll include a transcript of the chat, as well as we'll go through and make sure we pull out the important links related to this liquid mode. But thank you. That was really helpful. And Rachel, that is the end of our questions. So thank you very much for being generous with your time and sticking around and making sure that everybody's questions got answered. And thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful webinar. I think folks are going to go back and really have a great plan and tools to help students develop their digital literacy skills. So
that's so great. And anybody who's left, please, if if you're doing something cool with it, or if you've modified it, if you see a better way that it could be, please reach out to me. I would love to hear. I'm excited about the possibilities and what teachers can dream up when they're in their classrooms. So thank you everyone for your time, and I hope it was helpful.
And I'll just wish everybody a fantastic rest of the day. Have a great weekend. Have happy holidays, and we'll see you in 2021.